Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Scream from 2022, or Scream 5, or just Scream, I guess. So this is the fifth film in the Scream franchise. It is considered, they call it a requel. I thought the term, based on the critic Matt Singer, was the legasequel or something. I always like that term more, even though I thought I could pronounce it till now. But regardless, that's what this sort of is. It is the kind of legacy sequel for Scream. Even though I guess we did that 10 years ago, but who remembers that one now? This is not directed by Wes Craven, and it is not written by Kevin Williamson, which the other four films were. So it is different, as it's mainly headed by Radio Silence, particularly. I'm super confused who is in Radio Silence or not. I'm aware of them. I haven't seen Ready or Not. But this is by Matt Bertinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillett are the two Radio Silence people who directed this. And then another one, Guy Busick, who I think is like their buddy or part of it. I'm not sure. And then also this is written by one of the writers of Zodiac, as well as the two amazing Spider-Man movies, which people like now, I guess. This movie is done in a way that it understands how to make a solid horror movie. It definitely is that. As for being a Scream movie, I think what this film relies on is something that it just doesn't show you. And the difference between what the other films are referencing, which are like horror movies that we've all seen or have an awareness of or something, or could see after, is in this, they're all based on the Stab films, basically. And that the killer this time is inspired by the Stab movies, which were the kind of hat on a hat or movie within a movie that started with Scream 2, that they were the movies that based on the events of the Scream movies, I guess, or just the first one. I forget if they keep remaking each movie before it, because I did not rewatch Scream 3 recently, but they're basically talking about the Stab films, which were kind of in-jokes within the Scream movies. They'd always show scenes from them. You barely see very many scenes of the Stab films in this movie, although I think this film is very solid. It's a very solid horror movie, and I actually like what it does with the meta things. It felt like it was missing an element because the Stab films were so central to the plot. That's not just me wanting to see a movie within a movie and liking those kind of jokes. It is also because it is central, very central to the plot of this film, the Stab movies. And they keep referencing them. They even have a joke about how the eighth one was directed by Rian Johnson and all the fans hate it. I'm curious if Rian Johnson's seen this movie and what he thinks of that. But, and it's also weird that it gets into Star Wars stuff, because this is about toxic fandom, which I'm sure there is a side of horror fandom that is toxic, as all fandoms have that side. I don't think all fandoms are toxic. I just think people who are toxic are in fandoms. There's a difference. But in this, it's basically like that they are aware that there is a killer who is a fan of the Stab films, who is going after and taking on the Ghostface moniker, as no one repeats being Ghostface, because Ghostface is more of a moniker than an actual person. Duh. And the daughter of Skeet Ulrich's character is comes back to Woodsboro because her sister has been stabbed or has been attacked, by someone who's a fan of the Stab films. They're using Stab references. And then Sidney Prescott and Dewey and Gale Weathers come back as well, and they try to defeat this thing, and they kind of go back between the legacy characters and the new characters, particularly the daughter of Skeet Ulrich's character. I like some of what they're doing with the new characters, particularly the character of Melissa Barrera, whose character name is such a dumb horror movie Scream thing, because her dad was Billy Loomis, which is a reference to Halloween, and then her last name is Carpenter. I was like, fucking hell. Can't get a Deborah Hill reference, guys. Come on. But no, still, it's like a little stupid, but that's like Scream for you. I like that plotline. I like the ghost of Skeet Ulrich is in this. Spoilers, I guess that's sort of a spoiler. I do think this film was kind of frayed, because I think most legacy things, like I think the best example I still point out is Creed, but in most of them you kind of have to play this dance between the older characters and the new ones, and this one didn't really fully get that, where I sort of liked her. It doesn't seem like anyone really loves the teen characters, and I think that's a bit of a fail on the Scream franchise, because they couldn't fully launch these new characters at all. They kind of failed at bringing the new in. It was just more like the follow-up and the wraparound and the meta thing. But like, would I see Scream 6 based on that? Based on this? I don't know, because this felt like a very solid film, but I think it kind of fails in certain elements that, like, if you really dig deeper into it, it's like very tight and good for what it is and everything, but it feels like a sequel that 2 years later we're going to be like, I think that movie doesn't hold up as well and doesn't hold as much water as we think it does. And I don't mean just the Stab thing, which I do think the Stab films, like, they could have had the old clips of Stab movies in here. They could have made new clips. They do make a new clip, one new clip towards the end, but like there's other things in it. And when they sort of do this meta referencing thing, especially like we just saw the Matrix Resurrections, which I think does this a lot better by using that older footage and stuff. Now in this, obviously in the universe, you can't use the older Scream footage. That would break the universe apart or something. So they have the Stab movies, and they could have just recreated those things and had these. And it's like from the makers of VHS. It just felt like there's a Joe Dante layer that this film just doesn't want to get into, but like probably sort of should. I did like that it brings back characters from Scream 3 and Scream 4, Heather Mezzo as Randy's sister, things like that, and the various connections all these characters have and so forth. And I did like this movie. I had a decent time with it, but it just felt like a banal, decent Scream movie where like the part of the fun of the Scream films was like, oh, it's doing this weird meta thing, it's doing this fun joke. And it just felt like what I was sort of afraid of, where it was like just a straight movie that's going on the Scream chronology and like all that stuff. It's playing off of that, but it's not necessarily doing anything with horror movies. And I think it's like, let's talk about toxic fandom and legacies and stuff. But like, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on with horror. Like, why the fuck do I have to hear about Star Wars again? Like, I'm on Twitter. I don't want to hear about The Last Jedi anymore. And you could have done something a little more interesting. Now, I like the idea of like one horror movie was going to do the toxic fandom route, and like this is probably the best version we'll get of that, and that's fine. But on a true, like, thinking of the level of what the Scream movies are, I feel like I wish we could have had like a little more fun with this whole thing, you know, because the Scream movies were fun. They'd reference things, they'd play with things, they'd do all that stuff. And this just felt like people who are like definitely horror movie directors, but not directors that had like what Wes Craven had. Because what I didn't get from this that I get from Wes Craven's Scream, particularly the first one, is that movie not only loved horror movies, it wanted you to get into them and it wanted to play with them. This movie just wants to make a horror movie in the Scream franchise. It doesn't really think about if you're into Scream or not, or into horror movies. It's like it just assumes you are, which sure, I guess, but like I've always felt like the Scream sequels fail on this level of not going as meta and in interesting different ways as they could, and this is like another one that does that thing like again, so good for them. I think they're solid directors. It's a well-directed film. It's just like Scream goes on to different levels. It's talking about things at the same time. Like the first Scream, we never talked about how horror was sort of like not cool in the 90s, and like people were like looking down their nose at it. That's why Neve Campbell could do that big speech, and it could be part of that ad campaign about some stupid girl going up the stairs and stuff, and then you could show it and show you like, hey, you actually do love this. I didn't feel like in this Scream they played into like that kind of an element to it. It just felt like trying to just be a decent sequel. I felt like I was watching the Halloween 4 of Scream movies, where it's like, yeah, this is decent and stuff, but like in the end, if I'm gonna watch a Scream movie, where is this in the, you know, you're not gonna beat the first Scream. You didn't even really attempt to do that at all. And maybe I'll watch this over Scream 3 or something, but like my complaint with these legacy sequels is always the same thing. I'm like, oh cool, you're second best, and what did you fully accomplish by doing that? And I don't know if this accomplishes too much, but I will say it's a solid horror movie. You'll have a decent enough time. If you like the Scream films, there's surprises in here that I didn't spoil, like the Skeet Ulrich thing. There's definitely like cool things. There's some things they've like literally already done before, which makes you go, oh, okay, again. But I appreciate their attempt at it. I hope if they make another one, they really get into the meta narrative with it and the Stab films and play with those clips and play with our interpretation of these stories and things, which I think is like the larger element. Maybe I'm asking too much of my Scream films and I'm really just getting fucking hot dogs back, and I should just appreciate it because I should be hungry for hot dogs. But I feel like there was more potential in this franchise that it's never fully tapped into, and maybe I am asking too much to see silly clips of Stab movies and like going into those things. But you know, it just like they just reference It Follows and stuff. Like, aren't we gonna really get more into the horror stuff? I don't know. This reminded me of Your Next, where it's like, I know it was a solid movie, I know I had a decent time, but it did feel like it sort of washed over me and didn't have a real impact. And like It Follows, I still think about, like Scream and all those things, I still think this, it like came in and out so quickly, it was a decent one to do that, but it's like maybe it was a more solid film. Like the Matrix Resurrections kind of falls apart towards the end, but I think it rose higher than the consistency that this really was. You know, it's consistency in a way that's like sort of like well-directed flatlining or something. Like you didn't really push anything that much further, but you just like held the line in a way. And I think they did it in a good way, but it's just a good way that didn't necessarily I think fully engage me or surprise me. It just went like, oh cool, a decent Scream movie. And I guess maybe that's what these films ultimately are, and maybe that was the meta point of the whole thing, or maybe it's just, you know, would have been cooler to see a more interesting Scream movie that deconstructed itself in such a way that I was impressed that these films could still have their meta-narrative within their meta-narrativeness, but maybe I'm asking too much of its meta-narrative. Its underlying meta-narrative has found a way to be unsatisfying while also eating itself, which is, I guess, how we are in postmodernism, and that's probably the ultimate kind of place the Scream franchise would end up. So maybe I should just be sort of fine with this, but I guess I am, and I guess we're fine, and I guess I'll probably see another one. I hope they go a little deeper and maybe have some clips of stab movies, because it would have been nice to see them have a little more kind of like fun with it, because I thought this movie was a decent horror movie and they like what they do. But I think one thing that Wes Craven brought to this that this film really didn't get into is the fun and love of horror beyond just doing the fun and love of horror that a typical horror movie director brings to it. And Scream never really escaped that. So if you've seen Scream and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.